You remember that movie, The Day After Tomorrow? The one from 2004 with the giant tsunamis and those crazy flash-freezing storms? A whole new ice age? Bam! In just a few days? It was totally spectacular. Pretty terrifying. And honestly, for a lot of us, it was the first time we'd even heard about a climate tipping point. But, that was Hollywood. So in this explainer, we're going to unpack the real science behind all that fiction and find out what a collapse of the Atlantic's ocean currents would actually look like.
All right, so let's just get right to it with the big, dramatic question that movie left hanging in the air. Could our entire world really plunge into a deep freeze, in a week? Well, the short answer, nope. But the slightly longer answer is way more interesting, and it gets into a real and genuinely concerning piece of our planet's climate system.
So the real-life star of this whole story, it isn't a scientist hero. It's actually this huge, sprawling network of ocean currents. It's called the AMOC. And this is the real engine that was at the heart of the movie's whole idea. And more importantly, it's an absolutely critical piece of our global climate.
So what exactly is this thing, the AMOC? Well, you can think of it as the planet's circulatory system, basically. It's a massive heat distributor. It moves just enormous amounts of warm water from the tropics all the way up to the North Atlantic. And in doing that, it plays this huge role in regulating our weather patterns. I mean, it's the main reason places like Europe are so much warmer than they should be for how far north they are.
And this thing is a slow but incredibly powerful process. The best way to picture it is like a giant conveyor belt. So you've got this warm surface water traveling north. When it gets way up there, it cools down and gets saltier, which makes it super dense. And because it's so dense, it sinks way down deep into the ocean. From there, that cold, dense water travels south along the ocean floor. And then, eventually, it rises back up, warms up, and the whole cycle starts over. And get this. That whole journey for just one little drop of water can take about 1,000 years. 1,000!
Okay, so we've got this massive, slow-moving system that basically regulates our climate. But what happens if what if it breaks? And that's exactly where the current scientific debate is. Pretty much all scientists agree the AMOC is changing. But the really big question they're all wrestling with is, how close are we to a tipping point? A point of no return, where the whole thing could just collapse into a much, much weaker state.
And honestly, the predictions are kind of all over the map right now. I mean, back in 2021, the IPCC, that's the big UN climate body, they were pretty confident it wouldn't collapse before 2100. But fast forward just a few years, and some newer studies are painting a very different picture. One study out of Copenhagen in 2024 predicts a collapse could happen anytime between 2025 and 2095. And in that same year, you had 44 top scientists sign this open letter, basically warning that we are greatly underestimating the risk.
So what's with the scientific whiplash? Why the big disagreement? Well, it's because this is literally science happening in real time. One of the key pieces of evidence they're all looking at is this thing called the cold blob in the North Atlantic. It's this one spot in the ocean that's actually cooling down while almost everywhere else is warming up. A lot of scientists see this as a clear fingerprint that the AMOC is slowing down. But what that fingerprint is really telling us, well, that's the source of some really intense debate. And this isn't just some academic argument, right? It's a race against time to figure out a system that impacts everything, from the weather outside your window to the food on your table.
And this quote from Professor David Thornley, I think, just nails it. He says, although the details of exactly how things are changing are still being researched and debated, it's clear that unprecedented changes in Atlantic circulation are occurring. This raises warning signs about the future. So yeah, the bottom line is, even with all the debate, the warning signs are definitely there.
So, let's talk about the big what if. If the AMOC actually did collapse, what would that really look like? Because this is where we see the biggest, most massive gap between the Hollywood version and the scientific reality. Okay, so the movie gave us the sudden global ice age that happens in like a week. The reality? It would be regional cooling, not global. The movie focused on this US-centric disaster, right? But scientists say it would be a web of interconnected global impacts. And forget a quick, spectacular storm. We'd be looking at major climate shifts that unfold over decades. So here's the most important takeaway. This isn't some kind of planetary reset button. No, it's an amplifier for all the climate problems we're already dealing with.
And the domino effect would be felt all over the world. The first and probably most dramatic domino to fall would be Europe. We're talking significant cooling, maybe by as much as 10 degrees Celsius, plus more extreme storms. But as the North Atlantic gets colder, all that heat has to go somewhere else, right? So you'd see intensified warming in the tropics. That shift would mess with critical monsoon patterns, which could threaten food and water for billions of people in places like West Africa and South America. And at the same time, the American Atlantic coast would see a major rise in sea levels. And of course, marine ecosystems would just be thrown into total chaos.
Now, to really get the next point, you have to understand just how important the ocean is. I mean, it's our planet's #1 climate regulator. Just look at this. It stores a staggering amount of carbon. We're talking 38,000 billion tons. That is way, way more than everything living on land combined. It's like this giant sponge, a massive buffer that's been protecting us. A healthy, circulating ocean is absolutely crucial for sucking CO2 out of the air and burying it down deep.
But, and this is a huge but, an AMOC collapse would basically jam that whole mechanism. It would cripple the ocean's ability to pull down carbon and store it. So here's the wild paradox. This major cooling event in the North Atlantic would actually end up accelerating long-term global warming. Why? Because more of that CO2 would just be left hanging out in the atmosphere.
Okay, so this brings us to the human side of things. How on earth would we even begin to manage a crisis like this? And again, the movie's idea of just, hunkering down and waiting out a big storm, that is a million miles away from what the real challenge would be.
So the movie shows us what you could call the securitization approach. You treat it like an emergency. A sudden, clear threat appears, and the government takes these crazy exceptional measures to survive. But a real AMO collapse, it isn't a temporary emergency. It's a permanent, long-term risk. And dealing with that requires something totally different, what some experts call riskification. It's a complete shift in thinking. It's about managing future harms through constant planning, new regulations, and huge international cooperation. See the difference? It's not about surviving one storm. It's about adapting society to a permanent new normal.
And really, that's the heart of it. The real challenge here isn't a single event that you can just ride out. It's about fundamentally rewriting the rulebook for how we govern our societies on a planet that's now operating under a completely new and much more dangerous set of conditions.
So what can actually be done? Well, scientists are pretty clear on this. They're calling for urgent, coordinated action. And #1 on that list, first and foremost, is to cut the greenhouse gas emissions that are warming the planet and melting the ice, because that's what's destabilizing the AMOC in the first place. We also need to invest way more in just monitoring our oceans so we actually know what's going on. And we have to start building out those long-term plans for things like farming and our coastal communities now, not waiting until the crisis is already knocking on the door.
In the end, the day after tomorrow did get one thing right. It definitely raised the alarm. But it also gave us a dangerously simple version of both the problem and the solution. The reality isn't some sudden, spectacular disaster that we can just grit our teeth and survive. It's a slow-moving, incredibly complex global crisis that we have to manage for decades to come. So I'll just leave you with this final question. If the Hollywood spectacle is fiction, are we really prepared for the reality?